Welcome back to the Monochrome Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Salt Community. It is our mission to encourage, equip, and inspire the creative and technical communities serving in the local church. This podcast is for you, the people wearing black, serving behind, in the shadows, doing all the tech stuff. Welcome. My name is JT. I will be hosting today's episode, the second episode. We're super excited. We got some cool things going on today. We're talking about Apple Vision Pro, where we got a cool interview with Jesse Maitland from Bethel. We have a incredible, inspiring pastoral moment that's going to be coming from Keith. And then, as always, we'll be ending with a creative challenge. So let's get into it. Caitlin, tell us what you learned about the new Apple Vision Pro, which I'm sure no one has heard of yet.
All right, so this came out a number of weeks ago, and I am sure you all saw it blow up on social media. Our team talked about it in staff meeting, but when the Apple Vision Pro came out, people were just kind of going nuts talking about it and, all the demos that people had, all the unboxing videos. But we saw people crossing sidewalks wearing these. We saw people, just walking around the grocery store in their Apple Vision Pros. Well, number one, let's talk about sticker price. It is $3,500. If you kind of round up like me, $3,500 to buy the Apple Vision Pros. But there's also a really big difference between these and the Oculus. My family kind of blew up over Christmas over the Oculus. We love the popular games like Beat Saber, but Oculus is very much a gaming system, gaming goggles. Whereas Apple Vision Pro's big change is that they're a computer as goggles. They are trying to be a MacBook Pro on your face. And I think that is a whole different market. I think that really changes the use cases for the Apple Vision Pro.
So to me, there's two things that stick out here. One is the price point, obviously. And then the second is, this is AR, it's augmented reality, correct? It's different in that way.
Both, yes.
Okay,
So,
because the Oculus is just, it puts you in like this digital world.
The Oculus is virtual reality where you put it on and everything you see is virtual. Now they have cameras so that when you're in the menu system, like you can see your space, like your room. But yes, Oculus is much more VR, whereas I think Vision Pro, you're right, they're going in the artificial reality side of things and trying to show the real world with stuff on top of it. Yeah.
It seems like they think this is going to be the next MacBook. Like this is going to replace your actual like desktop computer, and it's going to be like in Iron Man where he's, working with all of the digital screens and that sort of thing, especially with that price point.
Yeah, they're definitely advertising it that way. And I know we talked about the Humane AI pin in the last episode where it has like the hand gestures, touching two fingers together, projection on the palm kind of stuff. It is similar here where you have the opportunity to use hand gestures to do things. Now, the funny thing is, okay, have you guys seen the Vision Pros in the wild videos of people walking down the street wearing these?
I have seen memes of Gen Z going to church and it's them getting out of their Tesla truck wearing the Vision Pro. And I'm like, it's giving Black Mirrors.
Yes. And I feel like that's totally in California. They are already doing that. They're getting out of their Tesla trucks with their Apple Vision Pros on to go to church and watch church from, their Vision Pro. Yeah.
So to me, that's one of the biggest hangups is just the aesthetic of it, the look. It looks ridiculous wearing these things in public. If you, you look so futuristic that it's big. It swallows your.
It's very
whole
Ready
head.
Player One.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
For me, I always kind of assumed there would be the glasses that would be a little bit more like Edith from Spider-Man No Way Home, whichever one it was, where he goes to Europe. That was Far From Home. But the way that those glasses are there, they're stylish, but there's also a ton of functionality there. And I think that might be potentially the goal to get to, but they don't have the technology at this point to put that much computing power into something so sleek and, fashionable that people would wear it in public. So at this point, what I would do is advise you, if you really are going to throw the $3,300 down and get these things, $3,500. Sorry. This, what is that? Like a 0.2% discount or something on?
It matters. In church
Right.
budget world, it matters.
Right. But my point is you need to have yourself a private room in which you use these things in so that people do not see you with them on. Just don't go out in public, at least.
Leave it to Keith to come in with an Apple reference or a movie reference of what Apple should have done with their glasses, which Marvel is a good basis to follow. Speaking of, this is not something we need to dive deep into now. Maybe it's a news story for later. Disney, I believe it was Disney, advertised a new floor that you can use for VR where like you walk and it's like the moonwalk. Like you walk and you don't go anywhere. So it is definitely entering like Ready Player One. If you've seen that movie or have read that book,
yes,
that is where we're headed. If people keep buying these products, this is where we're headed.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I could see, I think the big question here is like, how would this in any way be practical for like people serving or working in the church? And the only thing I can think of, the vision that comes to mind, and I mentioned Iron Man, is that moment when he's turning everything on in, I don't know, Iron Man 1 or 2. I don't know the movies. I'm sure Keith does.
I'll correct
and he's
you.
just like reaching and like touching everything. If I was like a sound engineer or an audio engineer coming in and I could just like put the goggles on and start turning everything on, and then you've got, you know, your Pro Presenter screen over here and like it's all like up in the air like that. And you can just reach it and use your hands tactily like that instead of having sliders and all that kind of stuff. At an affordable level, I think you could eventually see like sound booths that are just blank, empty booths with nothing in it. And all the tech is actually like virtual.
So there
Whoa.
is such a thing. Now, this is more Oculus Meta, but we actually did a workshop at SALT regarding like church in the metaverse. Because the metaverse was blowing up at the time. This was just like 2 years ago. And it was talking about you can go meet people via your VR, goggles. And people started churches there. And so it was, how are we reaching people that are living in this alternate reality almost already, spending their free time there? So church in the metaverse. But honestly, and JT, maybe you'll find this interesting as our marketing manager at SALT. I feel like Apple kind of missed out on a great marketing aspect that speaks to how these could be used, especially if you work in the church. They presented it more as it's your computer. You can work on a blueprint, while chopping carrots in your kitchen. But really, I think the biggest sell point is you can be watching a video tutorial on, let's say, YouTube or SALT University, and also then look at your board and follow along as you're watching these tutorials. So let's say your volunteers are learning how to EQ a new soundboard. Maybe you did an upgrade in your church sanctuary. You can watch the how-to video while like going back and forth, watching the video, in front of you, then looking down, seeing it on the board and making the adjustments. Same thing if you're like learning to set up stage for worship a certain way, or maybe you're practicing, I don't know, I can't come up with examples off the top of my head, but I feel like that's like the biggest marketing tool Apple could have used and they didn't. But I feel like that is the most practical way you could use these Vision Pros in real life.
Yeah, I could definitely see a place in the future where even you have, I don't know how this would work, but you have software and stuff that identifies where signal chains are going and all that kind of stuff. And maybe you're having an issue with, you can't hear your guitarist. And so you're like, the AI is telling you like, hey, the signal's getting blocked here. You need to go look at, this cable, or the cable's bad or whatever. And it would actually like help you see it, where it is in real time and go fix that. And solve that problem. And so I think even more than like watching a tutorial, it would actually like help give you the tools and like quickly solve those problems and know what needs to be done to do something. So
now, before we move on to the next section, or the next segment of the day, I just do want to say, if you're a youth pastor, these are not to be used as a tool to remember youth kids' names. Do not wear your goggles, your VR goggles or AR goggles, so that when kids walk in, it recognizes their faces and shows you their name. You still have to learn those on your own. Keith knows what I'm talking about.
You actually just have to hire a person or get a volunteer to remember them for you, and just walk right next to you and whisper their name in your ear as they're approaching you. So
like the Devil Wears Prada.
Exactly, Miranda Priestley moment.
Exactly.
Okay, next up, we are going to have an awesome conversation with Jesse Maitland. It's between Keith And Jesse is from Bethel. He is been there, I think, a large part of his life and his career, and so he's got a very unique perspective. So Keith actually got to sit down with him and have a little chat about his experience and about what it means to get burnout as a creative at SALT conference last year. So let's listen in on that.
Hey, SALT community. I'm here right now with Jesse Maitland of Bethel. And what I want to do is just kind of introduce him to you and let him tell a little bit about who he is, what he does, and share that with us.
My name is Jesse. I work at Bethel Church in Redding, California. I'm the live broadcast director. Been on that team for a long, long time.
Awesome.
So
we were talking about it before. You started young.
Mm-hmm.
So your life has pretty much been production.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it has.
Tell me, just what is it like working in that Bethel culture?
Working at Bethel has been definitely a wild ride. We've definitely had a lot of years just really evolving into an event house, training and equipping. That's been a big part of what we do. And I think in recent years, we've actually been evolving into what does it look like to create these conversations in a more creative capacity. But also we've had 2 music labels kind of been birthed out of that environment.
Yeah.
Both Jesus Culture and then Bethel Music as well. And lots of creative options with that. Awesome. So it's been fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. So tell me a little bit, because since we had a good conversation before, and I was just like, it was so life-giving listening to him talk about his life and what he does. Being a part of a community of production people, working long hours, feeling overworked many times, feeling tired. The days can be very long, right? Mm-hmm. And bleed deep into the night. But yet you keep doing it.
Yeah.
So does our community. We just keep trotting along, constantly battling and warring against burnout. What I want you to do is what is your encouragement to other people that are in your shoes, that have those feelings, or just have that responsibility? It feels like the weight of the world, that everything that's going on in the room, it kind of falls on them. It feels like to make it happen for the people to be able to do what they need to do, for the church to be able to worship, to gather together. What would be your encouragement to them?
Man, I literally, as you're talking, I'm just reminding myself of all the different things I've had to walk through. And the first thing is, I would say it's amazing what passion does for energy. Like, you can run on passion far longer than just pure energy alone. I mean, passion will carry you so much further. And, we like to talk about operating at a rest.
Yeah.
But there is a work to the ministry. Like, the Lord does call us, and there is work required. Mm-hmm. We all can't just be rested all the time.
Right.
Like, there are seasons of rest, and there are seasons where he calls us. And I think in those seasons, recognizing what your needs are, recognizing your weaknesses, drawing on your community and those resources, those are the wells that you've created in your life that you draw from, that support you. And I think, that's not popular to talk about, but that's reality. Like, that's life, that's ministry.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big thing. I think also a really big revelation for me has been, what does it look like what does the joy of the Lord look like for me? Like, if I receive the joy of the Lord as my strength, how does that renew me? How does that apply when I'm laying cable straight on the floor and taping the gaff just right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not fun work, but you're tired, you're grumpy. But when we learn to recognize that tiredness is just humanity, it's our human nature. It's our great opportunity to serve out of lack. Where we need him. It's our dependency on him. And I know it's super preachy, but it is really practical. Like, it's real for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when we lose, I find that when we are tired and we're struggling to have the energy, yes, sometimes it means go take a nap, but it also means, right? But also when we're feeling when we're feeling tired, sometimes it's because we've lost our vision for what we're doing. And we really need to get connected with the influence and the people we're serving, and just really renew our faith get those testimonies in front of you, have your own God encounters.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us expect church to bring us the God encounter. That's actually supposed to be our time. Like we're supposed to be renewed by him. It's our devotion, right? Like,
yeah.
Anyway, calling it out as it is.
You're right. Hey, that's the well.
Yeah.
The well is Jesus. It's going back to it and staying filled and not just constantly pouring yourself out, I guess, with no running back to the source. Man, that's awesome. Tell us a little bit about your workshop this year. Because I know it was centered a lot around Bethel.
Yep.
Which is your experience, and you've told me you have experience doing other things as well. You've gone out and you, as you said, the most traveled man in Reading, from Reading, right? So tell us a little bit about what that workshop looked like. What you talked about.
Yeah, a lot of you guys struggle with how do we look like Bethel, and I think everyone should be a unique expression. Their worship looks different, but I think the big challenge is how are you worshiping and how's that being expressed? Being intentional, being motivated, and not. And most of us don't have a paid camera team, and that's something we're blessed to have.
Yeah.
And most of you are working with volunteers. And so in the workshop, I try to really give some similar things you can do to kind of make it easier. You can borrow some similar looks and make it simpler for your volunteers. It's not going to break their backs, and much faster and much easier to learn. So.
If you've enjoyed the special guests here on the Monochrome Podcast, then you need to go check out the Road to Salt webinar season. This year, 2024, we are featuring 4 different series, each with 3 episodes, full of practical teaching and training that you can implement right away after the webinar is over. You'll also be joined by us, the SALT team, interacting with you and other community members throughout each episode. So go check out the Road to Salt webinar. Link is in the show notes.
I love that interview with Jesse Maitland, and just having the opportunity just to get to know him better at SALT Conference was one of the highlights of the week last year for me. One of the big things that we do here at SALT is we serve and encourage those that are busy serving and encouraging the church. It kind of answers the question of who encourages the encourager, right? And part of being that encourager, part of being that person that is always serving, means that sometimes we fail to take care of the things that we need, the things that we need to be encouraged for. In my time in ministry, one of the greatest concerns I ever had was about the people that were in the production of what was going on in Sunday mornings, because it really did seem as though they were the busiest of everyone at church. I mean, and how could they not be? Because ultimately, the lights have got to get turned on, the sound, people have got to be able to hear. It's important what production people do. Because of that, I always worried. I was like, do they get an opportunity ever to just kind of like be with God and not feel the burden of somebody asking them to push a button or to change and tweak that? And it kind of brought me to this book that I read years ago by Dr. Tim Elmore. It's called Habitudes. You may have heard of it. But if you're not familiar with it, kind of the idea is that each chapter in his book has an image. And in that image, he spends a page or two just kind of drawing out some kind of principle that we can use to make us better leaders. I was drawn back to this image of the starving baker. It's this picture of this baker. He's always baking bread. And the deal is that he's so busy feeding everyone else that he himself never eats the food that he's making. He's literally surrounded by food, but starving. And that's puts you in a kind of situation in which at some point, what's the tipping point of I no longer am able to serve those I'm supposed to serve because I haven't taken care of myself. I was reading John 15:15 the other day, and Jesus says this in there. He says, "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." Why I think this really applies to us, those who serve in the shadows, those that are constantly serving the church, is just this, that many times it can feel as though the reason everyone cares about you at the church is because of your talents and your gifts and how you can use those to serve the body. No one likes to just be valued for what they can do for someone else. We want to be loved for who we are. And I think what's so great here in John 15 is what Jesus is actually saying is that I don't love you because of what you can do for me. You're not just a servant in my kingdom. You're also my friend, which means that one of the things that we should do each and every week when serving the church is to remember that Sundays are not just for them, but they're also for us. That Jesus wants to, above all things, have a relationship with us, not just to utilize us to build his kingdom. Yes, can both things be done at the same time? Of course. But it is so human of us to pick one thing or the other, to lean one way or the other, to either be so ingrained, so concentrated on a relationship with the Lord that we neglect our duties and responsibilities, or to be so overwhelmed with responsibilities that we neglect having that time with the Lord that we need.
Yeah.
So in my over 20 years of working in student ministry, one of the things that I always had to do was I had to make a physical marker along the way to church, because I knew the second that I got to church, the second I walked in those doors, it was going to be the routine, and I was going to be focused on everything I had to do that day. So there was always this coffee shop, and when my car hit that coffee shop, I switched over to my time with the Lord, just me and him. And I would start to consider about the ways that I needed to deal with the Lord that day, what I needed from him, what he wanted from me that morning, so that it wasn't just about my agenda and it wasn't about my responsibilities, but it was also realizing that Jesus really wants a relationship with me. He wants my relationship with him to thrive. And if my relationship is thriving with the Lord, how much greater can then I turn around and serve those around me? So I think the takeaway here is to think back to that starving baker and kind of say to ourselves, are we doing all the things that are necessary for us to be able to do the job that we desire to do? That when we first entered into our role in serving the church, our passion, our heart was to serve and build up the body of Christ. Are we doing the things with our relationship with the Lord? Are we taking that time? Are we prioritizing that enough so that we are in a place where we can, in a healthy way, utilize the gifts and the talents and skills that God's given us to invest in his people?
That is such a great picture. I feel like that visualization of the starving baker, for me, just speaks volumes. But I know I grew up with some people who, if they weren't serving, if they weren't always staying busy serving others, they didn't feel like they were serving God. Now, I do not have that personality. Oh, Keith, you almost like convict me to serve others better listening to this at the same time, because my personality is not to think, how can I serve someone? But I have had to watch some of those people learn to be still and not just busy all the time, but to learn to be still so they can have those moments with God and make sure to take care of themselves spiritually just as much as other people.
Yeah, I love the picture of the baker. I need to read that book now that you've mentioned it. But I know, like, whenever I've led worship, or I think just when you're in ministry in general, people assume that you're getting fed, right? Like, no one's going to come up to you after you've been serving and most of the time and be like, hey, are you like, do you have a good prayer life? Are you reading your Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you feeding yourself on top of all these other things that you're doing? Unless it is someone who is also serving in the church. Because
That is so smart, JT, like to know your team that way too.
right, yeah, because maybe you're being fed, but maybe you need to go to some of your teammates as well and like call that out in them.
True.
And make sure that they're doing that. So it's kind of, unless you're a fellow baker, you may not understand that paradox.
Yeah, I think as everyone's talking, the thing, and this might be the Lord convicting me in this, of like, I don't get my full meal on Sunday. My nourishment should be coming from Monday through Saturday. And my serving should come from that overflow. And if I'm not serving from overflow, I'm serving out of obligation. And that actually is not a good place to serve from. And so when your well personally is dug deep with the Lord, and when you're actually a friend of Jesus, like you mentioned in that scripture, then I'm welcome to his table anytime, not just on Sundays. And it's not, this might get a little spicy, but it's not my pastor's responsibility or my team lead's responsibility to make sure I'm reading my word or to make sure I'm making intentional time with the Lord. Like, if that's my homie, if I'm the bride of Christ and that's really how I see myself, then I'm running after that. And anything that comes from that is spill over into my local community, into my church, into my production team, because Keith, I'm the person you're talking about. I do social media, photography, worship at my church, and like no one is checking on me. And I don't expect them to, not from a place of that's just not their heart. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility. It's my relationship. It's not my husband's. It's not my pastor's. It's mine. And so I think when we really start to shift towards that scripture you were talking about of being a friend of Jesus rather than a servant, it really changes the way we view Sundays. Y'all, the Pastoral Moment is one of my favorite segments that we do, along with our Creative Challenge. So this time I get to present the Creative Challenge, and it is for my fellow photographers and videographers. So I've been doing photography for 8+ years, and one of the first things that someone told me was to break the rules, which for creatives sounds pretty easy, but when it comes down to our gift and what we've been doing, it's kind of hard. So what do I mean by break the rules? I mean, shoot overexposed, underexposed, flip your camera upside down, shoot from an angle you might not. Whatever that looks like to you, that is how you break the rules. So the creative challenge for me to you this week is to do those things. Whether you're shooting B-roll for your church, you're shooting something for Instagram, try doing one of those things and see how it breaks you out of your creativity and actually helps you grow and rediscover wonder in your craft. Then post it on Instagram and hashtag Salt Creative Challenge because we want to see how you broke the rules. I cannot wait to see it.
All right, that is it for this episode 2 of the Monochrome Podcast. Thanks so much for listening in. Make sure to go click the link in the show notes to get more engaged with this podcast. Subscribe to never miss an episode, and we will see you again next week.
Each year, SALT hosts the Creative Conference for the church. It's a chance to be equipped, inspired, and connected with others who do what you do, and in person. With inspiring main stage sessions, practical workshops, and so much more, like delicious food trucks and creative art installments, we want you to join us. So check out salt2024.com for details and to get your tickets.